HOA Karen thought she was being clever, calling it a tow truck like she owned the block. What she didn't know, that car was a fully registered military vehicle, and what happened next shut her down fast. It was late on a chilly autumn evening when Karen's phone buzzed with what she believed was a golden opportunity to enforce community standards. Standing on her immaculately manicured lawn in the heart of Brierwood Estates, she peered down the block and spotted a vehicle parked across the street in the shadow of a large oak. To her, this out-of-place car was a glaring symbol of nonconformity, a challenge to her strict vision of neighborhood order. Without a second thought, Karen dialed 911, her voice dripping with self-righteous authority as she explained that an unauthorized vehicle was sullying the streets of her beloved community. Little did she know, what she had flagged wasn't just any vehicle. It was a fully registered military vehicle, part of a covert convoy on a routine training exercise. The tow truck dispatched in response was not destined for a simple removal. Within moments, the tension in the street escalated as the military escort, with its stern officers and flashing lights, arrived to reclaim the vehicle. As sirens wailed and official voices boomed over loudspeakers, Karen's confident smirk turned to shock and disbelief. The neighborhood's chatter fell silent as the reality of the situation set in. In that charged moment, a ripple of irony spread throughout Brierwood Estates. Here was a woman who had spent her life policing every detail and enforcing draconian rules, and now she was being publicly outsmarted by a system she thought she could control. Her 911 call had inadvertently summoned not just a tow truck, but the full weight of military authority. The incident, broadcast live on social media by curious onlookers, would soon become the talk of the town and the beginning of a dramatic power shift. Brierwood Estates was known for its near-obsessive level of order, a gated community where every blade of grass was trimmed to perfection, every house painted in muted tones to project a sense of uniformity, and every resident expected to toe the line. The local Homeowners Association, HOA, ruled with an iron fist, its regulations so detailed that even the slightest deviation was met with swift punishment. At the center of this meticulously maintained order was Karen Miller, otherwise known to neighbors as HOA Karen. Karen, in her early 50s, took great pride in her role as the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer. Every morning, clad in her signature tailored jacket and armed with a clipboard and smartphone, she made her rounds with hawk-like precision. Nothing escaped her scrutiny. Mismatched trash cans, overhanging tree branches, even a single unruly flower could trigger a complaint. To Karen, Brierwood Estates was her personal masterpiece, a pristine canvas that had to be protected at all costs. She believed that strict adherence to the rules ensured property values, maintained social order, and preserved the image of a perfect community. I, on the other hand, was a longtime resident with a different philosophy. I came from a background steeped in service and personal responsibility. After years of working my way up in a career that demanded courage and discipline, I found solace in owning my slice of freedom, a modest home and an expansive property on the outskirts of Brierwood. My life was a blend of order and spontaneity. While I respected community guidelines, I also cherished innovation and personal expression. This delicate balance had led me to acquire not only a home, but also a specialty vehicle, a military-grade transport that I'd proudly maintained as part of a passion for technical precision and as a reminder of my commitment to serve. My home was a stark contrast to the cookie-cutter houses of Brierwood Estates. Nestled on several acres of rolling fields and wooded edges, it was a place where creativity merged with rugged practicality. I ran my own small business out of the property, a venture that celebrated local produce and artisanal crafts, and I took pride in my well-oiled systems, whether that was my custom irrigation network or the military vehicle that sat gleaming in the driveway. To me, these were symbols of independence and resilience, values that often clashed with the rigid, risk-averse ideals championed by Karen Miller and the HOA. Over the years, I had tolerated Karen's petty fines and intrusive inspections, seeing them as the collateral damage of life in a community that prized conformity. But when she finally decided that an unauthorized vehicle was sullying the neighborhood's pristine image by calling 911 on the military transport, something inside me snapped. That night, as I reviewed my security feeds and listened to snippets of Karen's excited yet overbearing conversation, I knew I couldn't let this injustice stand. My life, my property, and my commitment to serving the larger community could not be upstaged by one person's narrow interpretation of order. Brierwood Estates was a community divided between those who adhered religiously to the HOA's often arbitrary dictates and those who valued the freedom to live and innovate on their own terms. As I prepared for the inevitable fallout, I could sense that this incident was more than a minor hiccup. It was the spark that would ignite a significant change in our little world. Karen's rigid worldview was about to be challenged in a way that nobody could have predicted. In the early hours following Karen's 911 call, confusion and chaos rippled through Brierwood Estates. I was in my study, reviewing the security footage when I saw the undeniable evidence. The military vehicle, with its polished hull and official markings, parked assertively in front of a tow truck as it was being escorted by uniformed officers. The footage was time-stamped, clearly showing the sequence of events as Karen's call led to a public mobilization that no one in our sleepy community had expected. The digital evidence spread quickly. Neighbors who had once admired Karen's strict enforcement now found themselves questioning whether such actions were justified. Online community forums buzzed with heated discussions. "Who does she think she is?" one post read, while another remarked, "I can't believe a tow truck was called for a military vehicle." The outrage was palpable, and the incident was soon trending under hashtags like hashtag Karen Overreacts and hashtag HOA Downfall. I knew that Karen's actions were not an isolated error. They were the culmination of years of petty fines and overzealous rule enforcement that stifled the personal freedoms of Brierwood residents. The military vehicle, which I had maintained as a symbol of my professional background and dedication, had become the inadvertent target of her misguided attempt to clean up our streets. The tow truck, intended to enforce the HOA's standards, was now a symbol of the absurdity that can result when rigid minds meet modern realities. Determined to confront this absurdity head-on, I decided to take the high road, armed with undeniable evidence and a commitment to transparency. I compiled a digital dossier of the entire event, complete with security footage snippets, screenshots of emergency calls, and supportive messages from my neighbors who had witnessed the incident. This dossier would soon serve as a rallying point for everyone who believed that property rights and professional respect should prevail over arbitrary fines. Meanwhile, Karen herself was oblivious to the scale of the backlash she was about to face. Confident in her approach and convinced that she was serving the community by eliminating nonconformity, she continued to make calls and issue warnings, unaware that her actions had already set off a chain reaction. I overheard snippets of her frantic conversation as she scrolled through her phone, mumbling about maintaining order and protecting property values. It was clear that to her, any deviation from the HOA's strict guidelines was an intolerable offense, even if that deviation was a fully legal, proudly maintained military vehicle. The tension escalated further when, later that morning, several neighbors approached me, voicing their dismay over what they saw as an abuse of power. "I always thought Karen was just a little too strict, but this is something else," one neighbor confided, shaking his head. "If they're going to call out every little thing, when will we ever be able to live our lives?" Their words resonated with a shared frustration that had been bubbling under the surface for years. It was as if this single incident had finally given them permission to question the status quo. Fueled by this support, I posted my digital dossier on the community forum with a simple message. Our community deserves better than arbitrary enforcement. Let the facts speak for themselves. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Dozens of comments poured in, praising the transparency and demanding that the HOA board take corrective action. The story spread beyond our gated community, attracting attention from local news outlets and even regional blogs. What started as a petty overreaction from a neighborhood enforcer had now evolved into a broader debate on community governance and individual rights. As I continued to document the events, I prepared for the inevitable public hearing that the HOA board announced would address the incident. I gathered additional testimonials from neighbors and made sure every piece of evidence was backed up by timestamps and clear footage. I even reached out to an independent legal expert who confirmed that the military vehicle was fully compliant with all relevant laws, a fact that would make it impossible for the HOA to justify Karen's actions. By the end of the day, it was clear that the digital community had taken my side. The combined momentum of shared evidence, public outrage, and unwavering support from residents created an atmosphere in which Karen's actions could no longer be dismissed as a simple mistake. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown that would force the HOA board to choose between defending arbitrary fines or embracing a new era of fairness and transparency. In the hours following the dissemination of the digital dossier, Brierwood Estates transformed from a quiet, meticulously ordered community into a hive of digital activism. Social media platforms erupted with videos of the incident, and hashtags like hashtag #KarenOverreacts and hashtag #MilitaryPride quickly trended locally. Neighbors, previously subdued by the weight of HOA regulations, began to speak out. Every shared clip and every supportive comment reinforced one clear message: property rights and professional respect should trump arbitrary rule enforcement. Local news anchors covered the story with a mixture of incredulity and admiration. "It's not every day you see a tow truck summoned for a military vehicle," remarked one reporter on live TV as she interviewed residents standing outside their homes, smartphones raised to capture the unfolding drama. HOA Karen's actions are being seen as overreach by many. This incident has become a rallying cry for personal freedom in Brierwood Estates. The narrative resonated deeply. What was meant to be a show of order had instead exposed the absurdity of rigid rules in a modern world. Inside the HOA board, the pressure was mounting. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors, and leaked minutes from these sessions revealed a community divided. Some board members, long loyal to the strict enforcement policies, argued that rules were rules and that any deviation, no matter how minor, needed to be corrected. Others, swayed by the overwhelming digital evidence and the increasing public outcry, contended that Karen's actions were a gross abuse of power that needed to be curbed immediately. Our primary duty is to serve the community and protect its residents, not to enforce personal vendettas, one outspoken member was quoted as saying in one leaked memo. The rift within the board grew, and it was evident that the traditional methods of enforcement were rapidly losing legitimacy. Meanwhile, the digital campaign in support of my cause gained momentum. Neighbors shared stories of past grievances, posting images of fines and complaints that seemed laughable in retrospect. An online petition demanding that the HOA board revoke Karen's authority gathered thousands of signatures in a matter of hours. Influential local bloggers and community activists began to champion the cause, praising the notion that the community should stand up for rational rule and individual rights. When a homeowner is unfairly targeted, it's not just a personal matter. It's a stand for all of us, one popular post declared, and the sentiment quickly spread. I continued to update my digital dossier with every new development. I posted additional security footage from the night of the tow truck incident, complete with annotations that highlighted the timestamps and the clear view of the military vehicle parked with official markings. I even uploaded a short interview with a local law enforcement officer who confirmed that the vehicle was indeed fully registered and part of a routine training exercise. Each update further undermined Karen's narrative and bolstered the public support for my cause. As the days wore on, the community's frustration reached a boiling point. Neighbors began organizing informal meetups to discuss the broader implications of the incident. Many expressed concerns that if the HOA board allowed arbitrary fines for something as benign as a military vehicle on the street, then what would be the next target? It wasn't just about towing or fines. It was about the erosion of individual rights and the suppression of personal freedom. Social media groups dedicated to property rights in Brierwood sprang up overnight, their discussions filled with both humor and determination to stand against overreaching authority. Karen, in her attempts to salvage her reputation, made several public statements. In a series of hastily recorded videos on her social media accounts, she claimed that her actions were purely in the interest of maintaining community order. "I'm only trying to keep our streets safe from rogue vehicles and disorderly conduct," she insisted. However, her words fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence, and the public ridicule that ensued only further isolated her. The escalating digital protest soon forced the HOA board's hand. In a high-stakes announcement, the board declared that a final public hearing would be held to address the incident and determine the future of enforcement policies within Brierwood Estates. The news sent shockwaves through the community, and a palpable energy buzzed through neighborhood forums and social media feeds. This public hearing was anticipated to be the turning point, a moment when the collective voice of the residents would force the board to reconsider decades of arbitrary enforcement. In the days leading up to the hearing, I coordinated with several neighbors, organizing support and ensuring that every piece of evidence was meticulously cataloged. I reached out to legal experts who confirmed the legality of my actions, and with every documented email, video clip, and online comment, our collective resolve grew stronger. The digital petition against Karen's practices reached tens of thousands of signatures, and every shared post served as a reminder that the community would no longer tolerate the oppressive overreach of the HOA. The tension was mounting to a fever pitch as the final public hearing approached. Neighbors planned to attend, armed with banners, signs, and their own stories of how arbitrary fines had intruded upon their lives. Every online discussion echoed the same sentiment, that the right to live and work on one's property, free from the whims of overzealous enforcers, was non-negotiable. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown that would redefine the balance of power in Brierwood Estates. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp morning at the Cedar Ridge Community Center, where the final public hearing was to be held. The boardroom was filled with a diverse crowd: HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of determined residents, all gathered for what promised to be a watershed moment in the battle for property rights. With a composed yet commanding presence, Councilwoman Denise Carter stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the unity and resolve of a community that had grown tired of arbitrary power plays. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including detailed security footage, comprehensive complaint logs, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Carter began, her voice resonant and steady. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her call for a tow truck, which resulted in the unwarranted involvement of a fully registered military vehicle, were not in the interest of public safety, but were the result of personal bias and a flagrant abuse of power. Our community's trust and our rights as property owners have been undermined by these actions. A heavy silence fell over the room as Carter continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind any sanctions and fines imposed in connection with this incident, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such an overreach. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines that safeguard the rights of every resident and ensure that enforcement actions are based strictly on verifiable facts. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an isolated error. It is a resounding declaration that Brierwood Estates will no longer tolerate the imposition of personal vendettas under the guise of community standards. Her words struck a deep chord, and murmurs of unanimous agreement rippled through the assembly. At that moment, a seasoned community advocate, renowned for his tireless work in defending individual freedoms, rose to speak. "Today we stand united," he declared, his voice firm and impassioned. "No resident should have to endure the tyranny of arbitrary rule enforcement. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our community values innovation, independence, and the sanctity of private property above all else. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every instance of abuse is met with swift, decisive action." His declaration was met with a roar of applause, echoing the collective will of every individual in the room. Following this, a senior official from the local oversight committee presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all evidence, expert testimonies, and official reports confirming that the military vehicle in question was legally registered and that the tow truck had been summoned without valid cause. The evidence was irrefutable, and the internal review panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against any party responsible for the misuse of authority. The full report was scheduled for immediate public release, ensuring complete transparency. Councilwoman Carter concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Brierwood Estates, a community where every resident's rights are respected, where public safety measures are based on fact rather than personal bias, and where creative independence is celebrated." Our vote today stands as a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no individual, no matter how self-assured, can impose their personal vendettas on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the undeniable right to live, work, and innovate freely on our own property. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for the community's future. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the residents forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Brierwood Estates. The days of petty fines and personal vendettas were over. A future built on respect for individual rights and factual enforcement was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Brierwood Estates underwent a remarkable transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, igniting impassioned discussions about property rights, community governance, and the importance of basing enforcement actions solely on verified facts. Editorials in the community newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Brierwood" and "Community United Against Arbitrary Enforcement," celebrated the decisive steps taken to safeguard every resident's rights. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreKaren, and #CommunityJustice trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to eliminate personal vendettas from the rules. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future where individual creativity and autonomy were cherished rather than stifled by rigid bureaucracy. Neighbors, who had long lived under the shadow of arbitrary fines and intrusive oversight, now spoke openly about their right to manage their property in ways that reflected their unique identities and passions. "Our homes and businesses are our sanctuaries," one resident declared passionately at a bustling meeting, his voice resonating throughout the crowded space. The atmosphere was one of hopeful renewal, a promise that Brierwood Estates would always champion personal freedom and innovation. Within the reformed HOA board and the local oversight committee, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and reinforced by community advocates, launched comprehensive training programs focusing on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint would be scrutinized rigorously and that no resident would ever again be subject to arbitrary rule enforcement. "Our duty is to protect every resident's rights and dignity," one official declared during a follow-up press conference, affirming the community's renewed commitment to fairness and accountability. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized with renewed vigor, organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns designed to empower residents and emphasize the importance of factual, impartial governance. When we stand together, our voices have the power to reimagine our community, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring residents to unite in a shared vision of fairness and progress. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen's baseless tow truck call and the subsequent public humiliation had not only reclaimed my rights, but it sparked a broader movement throughout Brierwood Estates. Neighbors who had once felt powerless now shared their own stories of overreach and arbitrary fines. My digital dossier, comprising video evidence, time-stamped logs, and expert testimonies, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to live without fear of personal vendettas. Karen Miller, once the unchallenged enforcer of Brierwood's strict regulations, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands as one. As digital records of her past missteps circulated widely, her influence waned dramatically, underscoring the necessity for reform and a new era of rational enforcement based on facts alone. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Brierwood Estates, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the gentle glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading, "Unity, Freedom, and Truth," was unfurled between towering oak trees, and heartfelt speeches echoed promises of a brighter future. Today, we celebrate the victory of our rights over arbitrary interference, a victory that belongs not to one individual, but to every resident who cherishes the freedom to innovate and live unburdened by unnecessary restrictions, Councilwoman Carter proclaimed, her voice both resolute and inspiring. The ensuing standing ovation was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our freedoms and to ensure that personal bias would never again dictate public policy in Brierwood Estates. As each new day dawned over our transformed neighborhood, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen's misguided tow call, intended to enforce conformity, was exposed by the revelation of a fully registered military vehicle, and how that moment of public humiliation spurred decisive reform, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the inalienable right to live, work, and express themselves freely. Every sunrise carried the promise that in Brierwood Estates, truth, justice, and individual freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Brierwood Estates would forever be a place where integrity, innovation, and respect for individual property were celebrated above all else.